Alright, so for a quick video today, I'll be giving you guys some practice with one of the crucial champion select rules for junglers. The rule in question is the one where you should get in practice of breaking down every champion's qualities into numbers or something like that, so you can better guess what your team could use. The basic summary of this practice is if your team has low total score for initiation, then you'll lack initiation. A low score for damage, you need to pick some damage. High score for tankiness, then you don't have to necessarily be tanky, and so on and so forth. You have to be super unbiased when grading champions, and you have to have at least some knowledge about them before you can do this effectively. The first example I'll give is not really for practice, but it's the champion select I had from a game I played last night. This game was an utter disaster from the start, and you'll see why. The enemy starts off picking Karma. She's relatively safe in lane, has good utility, poke, and good burst, although her damage beyond that is horrible. She can be in any lane, so I can't figure out the strategy yet. And then my teammates lock in both Yasuo and Aatrox. This combination is an absolutely atrocious pick, and it already mega fucks with our ability to pick anything appropriate. They're both squishy, farm reliant, valuable lane targets as in they're gonna get ganked, and vulnerable to crowd control. To make matters worse, they're picked so early that the enemy team has ample opportunity to counter them. If they were picked individually, I wouldn't have cared, but together so early, it's such a risk. The enemy follows up with Vayne and Thresh, which is a strong combination and confirms Karma as a solo laner. They're a very difficult lane to gank, although they can be very aggro and can become easy to gank as a result. It's basically depending on their playstyle, so you can't truly count on it. My teammate picks Nami, and that's a decent pick as she's someone that can assist in a gank well, and her ultimate adds some minor initiation power and decent peeling. The enemy still has two empty spots, and one of them is the jungle. I have to make a choice that takes into consideration those two last picks, a solo lane and a jungler, and cover what they could be. In short, my team is super AD based, very squishy, lacks crowd control, lacks initiation, lacks early game safety, and is generally unsafe throughout the whole course of the game. What I needed was an AP tank of some sort with at least moderately decent damage for a tank at least. I was thinking of champions such as Amumu, Zac, and then Sejuani. Zac would have offered the initiation we needed and has good sustain damage, plus he has great synergy with Yasuo. Amumu has the burst initiation, so we could just wipe them out before our weakness cruises over. Sejuani has long range initiation and alright damage as well. I ended up picking Amumu because Sejuani is vulnerable early game and is gold reliant, which is something this team doesn't need more of with Yasuo and Aatrox. And Zac's damage is more sustained, and I figured if the fight doesn't end in one big burst, then we'll probably just lose. I mean, we still lost the game, but at least I felt my pick made sense in the grand spectrum of things. Sometimes your team will pick a disaster composition that you can only hope your teammates are super good and dominate, or that the enemy team just sucks. There are times where you simply cannot salvage such a shit team composition. Even if the players involved are good, a bad composition can still destroy your chances of winning. Now for some actual practice. Let's say you're dead last pick. You're red team, so you have the definitive last pick. The enemy team picks in this order: Kha'Zix, Ahri, Tristana, Karma, and Riven. Your team has locked in Fizz, Twisted Fate, Vayne, and Nami. Again, your last pick, so you have to make up for your team's problems and deal with the enemy team as well. Looking at the enemy team, their total tankiness is considerably low, and they lack any form of initiation. They have really high damage and high burst as well, so they will be dangerous throughout a fight, but 3 of them require landing combos in order to deal that damage. What you can assume is that their fights they're involved in will either require them to catch someone or your team to initiate on them, and they hopefully will be able to turn it around against you. This means your team could have the upper hand in fights if you're the ones to start the fight, and if you bring crowd control to disable their ability to access their combo damage. Now looking at your team composition, your team also lacks proper forms of initiation. While Nami's ultimate can technically cause a fight, it is super unreliable and is better for controlling the fight rather than starting it. Fizz's ultimate is too slow to be used as a true initiation, and it's telegraphed enough that the enemy team can prepare to jump into the fight, and thus you'll lose the chance to control them before they start their combos. Twisted Fate can also technically initiate some fights, but it's in a similar vein as Fizz, as in its super telegraph. Fortunately, your team does have adequate amounts of crowd control to control the enemy team, and enough damage to kill the enemy team quickly during the CC duration. Your team's lane safety is rather average, but their ability to help you kill the enemy team in lane is huge, especially Twisted Fate's lane. Using all this information, you can figure out a few key things you want in your champion select. Both teams lack a strong initiator, so strong initiation is key for your choice. Your team has two sources of AP damage, so you may want to consider an AD initiator, but at the same time, Vayne is a hyper carry and this might not matter too much. Your team's ability to assist with early ganks means you can either pick someone with high CC to chain someone to death, or someone that can burst the enemy targets down as your laners can control the target for you. The enemy team has super high damage, so you definitely need someone that's tanky in some way, or someone that can burst the enemy targets down fast enough before they retaliate. Kha'Zix is an aggressive ganker, so your choice should also be someone that can apply pressure early, or at least deny his early kills. The choices should really be narrowing down, so in a few seconds after this sentence, I will reveal the choices I would have made. If what you figured you would have picked falls under something I'd picked, then you've passed the test. The possible choices that would fit this situation would be Jarvan, Gragas, and Xin Zhao. Before you get your pitchforks, other tanks like Sejuani, Maokai, and Nautilus could fit, but I think they'd have weaknesses in comparison to the first three in this specific situation. Jarvan would be able to cut through the entire enemy team for his initiations and deal reasonable damage while doing so. He'd be able to apply great burst damage early on for his ganks and is one of the best gankers for early pressure. Your team already has several sources of AP, so another source of AD would be great. His ability to initiate fights without needing his ultimate allows him to constantly threaten a team fight and take advantage of any situation in which the enemy has lost their cooldowns, and cooldowns are very important for these type of combo champions. While he does suffer from sustain issues, those issues don't last beyond his first clear, and Kha'Zix is not a major threat that early into the game for someone like him. Gragas would be basically in the same situation as Jarvan, except he'd be the AP alternative. Gragas would achieve similar things as Jarvan, but he's a far better bodyguard than Jarvan, although, ignoring ultimates, Jarvan has a better time initiating full-fledged fights. Xin Zhao definitely does not have the initiation prowess of Gragas or Jarvan, but he has considerably more killing power while being able to be tanky. The enemy team is basically pure squish, so adding another threat to your roster could definitely work out, especially considering how gung-ho the enemy team is being forced to play since they lack any initiation. They'd bring the fight to your team, which would cure Xin Zhao of his kiting weakness. He'll provide deadly ganks early, especially against the hyper-aggressive Riven and the easily killed Pre-6 Ahri, all while being able to punish Kha'Zix if he catches him in any counter ganks. He's basically the damage alternative of the three. As for other tanks, Sejuani is just too weak early in the game. While her ultimate can do wonders, she's not the best champion at dealing with high damage champions early. It's the case of her being able to achieve similar things as Gragas and Jarvan, but riskier because you'd be picking her against a team that needs to be controlled heavily in the early game. Maokai would be a strong contender for a pick as he's one of the best jungle gankers in the game and the enemy team is very vulnerable during the lane phase. The problem is that the enemy team is so full of threats that if you initiate on one of them, the rest are free to dive your team while your abilities are on cooldown. You're either stuck trying to initiate fights against a very jittery team, or being a bodyguard and having no initiation. Nautilus is basically the same as Sejuani, except with far more control and far less killing power. Nautilus would work out to protect the Vayne, but you can't guarantee that that specific teammate will do well. If the enemy team didn't have as many damage dealers, the Nautilus would have been perfect, but even a champion like Nautilus can't control so many threats, and all it takes is your MVP to position poorly and get sniped by one target you couldn't control. Like I said, a lot of tanky initiators would work in this situation, so you can pretty much play the one you're best at and most comfortable with, and guarantee yourself some success. It's just when you have to make a choice between some nearly equally qualified champions, you have to start looking at the smaller details. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. I have a few sponsors that are helping me maintain this channel, such as Crunchyroll, Pro Build Systems, and Loot Crate. I have links to these services in the description below. Using them and using my codes directly supports my channel.